The next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the top. And there's a couple of possibilities. You can use, some kind of kiln-dried wood. You can glue it up even if you like. For the top, sometimes kiln-dried wood is a lot easier, and it's certainly easier to get in a reasonable size. 3/4 is probably a little thin, but if you got 5/4, it'll trim out about an inch. That'll make you a good top. Or you can take a sliver of same green wood you used out of a tree and cut you out a little plate blank and use that. So we're going to take this plate blank. And we're going to try to use this thing for a jam chuck. So we're going to make a large tenon right here. Now, I probably shouldn't, I'm jumping a step here. I skipped a step. I skipped the step where I actually put a tenon on it. So you're going to put it flat up against the chuck face with your tailstock support and put a tenon on it. Or a recess if you prefer, but I generally prefer a tenon. And we're assuming that I've already done that. I've already, but I needed to clarify that because you wondered, now how did we get there? That's how I did it. I already went through that step. Now what we're going to try to do is go ahead and make a very tight fit for this lid and use it as a jam chuck so we can finish off the bottom. Now, if you got a vacuum chuck like I have at home, that's the fastest and easiest way. It's a little harder to take that on the road. But it's the way I would normally do a small box. We'll see what kind of luck I have with this. So, what you generally do is measure it with maybe some dividers. I'm going to brace it on this side and mark it. At the same time, I'm looking to see where where that line is on the other side. Being careful not to let this side contact the wood or bad things happen. So this is how that lid is going to fit inside the box. Is you're going to have this little bit of a tenon that fits in the box so it won't slide off. It's not going to fit real tight if you don't want it tight because wood moves. We don't want the little kids wrestling with trying to get the box top off. And then at some point in time we got to do a trial fit. We have to be very deliberative because if we're taking off a little bit, we're only taking half of that little bit off the side we're cutting because we're going to get the other half on the other side. yeah, you can use a tape measure as well. If you're more comfortable with a ruler, the ruler works good too. I used a ruler a long time before I got comfortable using those dividers. Flatten up this surface a little bit. And this tenon doesn't have to be very long, a little more than 1/8 of an inch maybe. And I want to kind of line up the grain the same direction. Grain's running this way. Grain's running this way. Oh, this one here more. A vacuum chuck is a very nice, very luxurious thing if you do a lot of bowls and stuff. But this is old school and it works. And if you do it a lot, you get real good at it. I don't do it a lot. On the big ones. Now the amazing thing is how tight, when you get these things snug, really how tight these things really are. But despite that, I'd still bring up tailstock support. Now at this point in time, I would clean off the bottom. That's the whole purpose of this, is being able to get rid of this tenon, smooth out the bottom, do any final sanding, and put a little decoration on it. I'll hit a lick at that, but we're not going to try to finish this. I just want to show you the process. What's that? Embellishment. It could be as simple as a couple of beads. Or it could be some texturing, and then I think we'll have time. What do you do?
8:15.
8:15. Gotta get on stick here.
8:15.
Well, that's what happens sometimes. You don't have tailstock support.
Most of the time, right?
So anyway, bring up tailstock support as long as you can. Clean as much of this as you can, and then remove the tailstock. Just deal with it a little bit in the middle. We don't have time to fuss with this. To get it off sometimes when it's on there really good, you've almost got to either come in here with a skew, or you actually can take this down. This is going to be the box lid. So the next step, you could take it, if it's a scrap, you can cut it all the way down. If it's going to be the box lid, like it is in this case, you get in there with a skew or a chisel and just pop the two apart. You know, it doesn't take a skew, but skew is a handy chisel and you just wedge it apart. So now we're going to go ahead and shape the lid. We're going to shape the underside of the lid. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to now that we've finished the bottom of the box, we've got to simulate that, we're going to take a scraper or a parting tool. Parting tool works just fine. To come in here to the side, we're going to pull this back just a little bit so we'll actually rest on the flat. And just ease it back just a little bit so the lid won't be sloppy, but it's not going to be a snug fit. And if the wood moves, it'll still fit in there. So we want to take off, maybe no more than a 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little less than that. And then we still want to have just a little bit of a round edge there. And then while you're in this stage, you want to go ahead and take some more wood out of the bottom to lighten the lid a little bit. And after you sand that, this is where you do some embellishing on the inside. This is probably going to look kind of rough because this wood is probably still damp enough, it'll probably shred. But, you know, you could maybe use a texturing tool. Put a texturing band on the inside. You could use a point tool or a V tool. Let's see what that looks like. Kind of shredded mess. A brass brush will clean this stuff up well. These abrasive pads tend to do pretty well too. Just kind of clean up that fuzz. But to kind of punch that up a little bit, we want to outline it a little bit with a bead, or at least a V groove on each side of that texture. So. Maybe put an extra in there, drop this, roll it over, make a little bit of a bead there. I can clean that up a little bit. Make another bead there. But that's decorating. Just embellish it with some type of texturing, or as simple as a bead, but that just gives you some idea of how you go about it. Now the trick is, we don't have any way of holding it here. I don't have a chuck this big. So you do something very similar on a jam chuck on the base. Get you a big old piece of scrap wood. A softer wood, actually the damp silver maple would work real well, but pine does pretty well. I did a recess. You put this on here, but this time instead of making a big tenon, you're going to make a big mortise and wedge this thing in to finish off the top. Maybe put a bead or any embellishment on the top. If you do similar, you do a friction chuck, but this is going to go inside it instead of over. Follow me? You're also going to drill your hole for your knob. So making a knob out of contrasting wood is good. So if you're doing it out of something light, box, something like walnut would work out well. Here's a little different approach that I got. I think Wes Jones had this idea where you pin this, you drill a hole in where the knob's going to be, and then you cut this away on a bandsaw or grind it away on a belt sander. I use a little piece of brass and put a little rod in there so it's thin. It's kind of nice, but I think it's more trouble than it's worth. Frankly, I think it's easier to just use a forceps bit, drill your hole, and glue the bead in there. For the effort, but that's an opportunity. You can also put texturing on the knob. In this case, I used I didn't bring one with me, a knurling type tool or Wagner tool. Now, you can do these different ways. Some of y'all, I know not a lot of y'all just had, you've got a chuck, but you may not have different sized jaws. You can actually hold this inside most of your chucks. If you do, you want to make sure you've got a blank that's long enough so it'll extend out so you can safely get near the bottom. So we can stick this in here, for example. And it won't hold it as well as a smaller set of jaws, but it'll hold it well enough to turn the knob out of without any problem. And as long as your blank is long enough so you don't have to worry too much about getting close to these jaws. So the process we go through. The first thing I want to do is clean off of this any damage. First, normally we're going to start off a square blank and turn it around and put a tenon on it, and we'll just kind of assume that. I like the round tool posts. I mean, a lot of folks, there's several vendors that sell them. They're easy to make, they're fairly inexpensive, and they do real well. They're nice, and tools float across them very easily. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage that I prefer to have a more traditional one is the support is further away from the face of your woods. If you're doing really fine detail work, you don't get as much tool support with that rest. But it's like what kind of chuck do you like? A lot of that's just an acquired taste. It's not right or wrong. It's whatever you tend to prefer. So we've got it cleaned up. Now there's two different schools of thought. You need to put the tenon on this end and turn the knob down. And here's an example of one of those where I did the tenon side out, and that way I could take the hole that I've drilled and check it to make sure I've got it fit properly. The other way is you can carefully caliper it and then turn the knob, so it's kind of whichever way you want to go about it. But let's say in this case we're going to caliper it. All I'm going to do is then shape the top of the knob. Sharp tools, delicate cuts, because again we don't have a lot of strength on this chuck because we're using the inside of the chuck jaws. Then before you go much further, you sand it off, put any texturing that you might want to put on it. Then you're just going to round over the edge. Then you're going to, and you want the knob to be a fairly reasonable size for a small child to handle, so I'd say at least an inch, inch and a half. Then you're going to make your cove. Beads and coves, good thing to practice with. Remember to cut downhill. That means on a spindle like this, I'm cutting from large to small. When I get to the bottom, I got to start in the other direction and go from large to small. Then you're going to come in, make this a little bit smaller. And then you're going to start putting a flat area for it to, fit against your box. And not only is it going to be flat, because the box is probably slightly rounded at the top, you probably want to come in just a little bit, inward a little bit, so it'll have just a little bit of domes a little bit, so you'll have a nice clear fit. The size, I think a half an inch is probably a plenty good size tenon, and it'll match the standard drill bit. I was going to make it tonight, if I got to it, I was going to make it 5/8 inch just because that's the size wrench that I use the size with, and if you sharpen one end of a wrench, it's not the best steel for cutting, but for sizing a tenon, it works pretty well. You want to get it fairly close to begin with. Once you get fairly close, you put the sharp end on top, lift up on the bottom so to make sure you got it rubbing. And then this will get you pretty close to the size drill bit you're going to use, whether it's a half inch or 5/8. Now keep in mind, this is going to be a little bit larger, just a hair. So you need some kind of way to test it. So if you're doing it this way, you want to have done this before, make sure it fits your particular drill bit, the size hole. And then probably you find you still got to come back just a little bit to make it a little bit smaller. That's why the one I passed around, sometimes it's easier to do it with the knob size out, and you take your lid and try to fit it to make sure you've got a pretty good fit so the glue will hold. It's got a nice mechanical hold. And when you get it all done, just part it off. You don't want this too long because chances are the hole you drilled inside the lid is probably, you don't need to drill much more than about a half an inch or so. And there you go. In terms of styles on the box, some of these Some of them, as you see, are segmented. Some of them use what they call stave construction, kind of like a barrel. You use longer pieces of wood. That works well if you like gluing up stuff. I just find turning green wood is an easy way to do it. One little trick I want to show you. For those of you only going to make a lot of bowl blanks, you know, cut your bunch of tenons so you can cut these things on bandsaw. You can use cardboard, but if you're going to do a lot of them, sometimes it doesn't hurt to take some old thin plywood, or in this case, some paneling I had. I've seen people use nails, I've seen people use screws, but if you use nails and screws, you got to have an extra tool. But if you use a small awl, a really short one you make yourself, and you make a birdcage awl so that you have 4 flat sides on it, it'll cut a hole real well in green wood, and you've got no problem just embedding that. You just put it in and pull it out and store them together, and it just works real well. So that's maybe a little tip on your templates. So there's the process of the box. I'll be here for a couple minutes. If you got any questions, thank you.